Hello and welcome back to Controlled Crash. My name is Chris, and if you're just joining me for the first time, my goal is to show that concept art can be for everyone, regardless of skill level. Today's video is going to be a little different. We're going to dive into some common questions which often get asked by aspiring artists, and I'm going to offer an industry perspective that will hopefully illuminate some of the path and make it easier to understand. In the background, you'll see an excerpt from a lesson on character creation and how to effectively steal poses from my upcoming concept art crash course that I've been working on. So we'll let that play in the background as we cover a topic that I think is important to a lot of artists, but they may not necessarily know how to articulate it. So, one of the questions that gets asked a lot by newer artists is, how do you start a piece? They're looking for that one surefire way to start a piece every time. And while on the surface that may seem like a valid question, how do you start a piece, that doesn't really make sense for a career artist who does this for a living. Because let me pose the same question in a different way. How does a chef start a dish? Same question, same exact question. How do you start a piece of professional work? So you might ask a chef, how do they start a dish? And you can already tell the answer is going to be, what kind of dish? See, I think what younger artists are asking for is a bulletproof way to start their piece every single time. They're looking for that one common process or pipeline that's going to take them from initial idea through to final completion every time. The problem is, much like the chef example, it depends on what you're doing. So it's not like a chef is going to say, okay, I figured out how to cook up lasagna, let's say. I know how to do that. I accomplished being a chef. I know how to produce my dish. Well, you know how to produce that dish, which has a specific taste with specific ingredients for a specific audience. When it comes to creating an art piece or any piece of concept art or development art, how you start the piece is dependent on what the piece is. Now, that may seem like it's kind of a non-answer or a dodge, but let me phrase it to you a different way. How do you measure the quality of a chef? I think there's really two ways to do it. Me not being a chef, of course, I'm just extrapolating here. One is the quality of each individual dish that they make. So that's the analogy here, is the quality of the piece of artwork that you're creating any good? And the other is, how versatile is that chef? How many different dishes do they know? And ideally, a chef that does an amazing job of only one type of dish is not terribly useful because they're not terribly versatile. So in this instance, the question of how do you start a piece, which is answered with, it depends on what type of piece it is, would say that the way to start a piece is determined by what type of piece you're creating. Now, follow me here. The more types of pieces that you know how to create, the more you can put those recipes into your repertoire. And that way you have more opportunities to create good pieces. So a character piece might be begun one way. You might start a character, a sci-fi character, a certain way. You might start a weapon design in a different way. You might start an environment in a third way. The more ways you have of starting a piece that you're well versed in, that you're competent in, that you can take from initial idea, whether it's sketch or 3D block in, down to final, the more versatile you are as an artist. For me personally, if it's a character piece, I start with black and white sketch or thumbnail. If it's an environment piece, I tend to start with a photo reference and then I photo bash on top of it, or if I've got it available, 3D geometry that I can light and render. If it's a vehicle, sometimes I'll start with a sketch and photo bash on top. Sometimes I'll start with a sketch and move straight into painting. Sometimes I'll start with a 3D block in and paint on top of it. Sometimes I'll start with an outline and I'll photo bash into it. And these are all methods of starting a piece that produce the best work with the least amount of effort depending on the type of work that I'm trying to produce and the conditions under which I'm trying to produce it. So to bring that all home, when somebody asks what's the best way to start a piece, it really depends on what you're trying to do. For example, would I start a character with a 3D model? Probably not, unless I'm in a situation, a professional environment, where I've been given a 3D model to work on top of, and I need to modify something that's existing or work on top of a pre-existing character. Left to my own devices, would I 3D model something first before painting on top of it? Probably not. I can do it, it's just not my preferred method of taking a character from the blue sky blank phase of just coming up with an idea through to final. I like to start with a thumbnail and work through there. However, the reverse of that is with an environment. I much prefer to start with either an existing color palette that I can pull from, a photograph that I can paint on top of, or a 3D model that I can light and render, or 3D environment terrain data, that sort of thing. Simply because my preferred workflow for that is to start with as much information pre-existing and then modify it to suit my needs. Whereas with a character, I like to start with as little information as possible and build on top of it, the idea of additive design versus subtractive design. So if someone were to ask me, is a sketch the best way to start a design? I would say possibly. Possibly, if that's the best way for you to start a design, a specific design, absolutely go for it. But I would hesitate to say that the best way to start a design is always a thumbnail, or it's always a gesture, or it's always a black and white block-in, or it's always starting with color. And I think the way I came to this was, as a young artist, I was always working towards and trying to find the perfect way to start a piece every time, as though I could just sort of set it and forget it. That's like saying, every dish that I'm going to cook as a chef, I'm going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees and grease the pan, right? Makes sense from a very narrow perspective, but it doesn't work if you're making soup. It doesn't work if you're making bread. It doesn't work if you're making cereal. It's one way of setting up the process that leads to a very particular outcome. So I would say at least what I did early on is I tried as many of them as possible, looking for that preheated oven to 350 and grease the pan, sort of one-stop shop solutions. And I never found it. I just kept working through different ways to start a piece, hoping to find my one perfect way. And eventually, what I found is I just banked a bunch of different ways to start a piece, and none of them ever solidified as the way, which I really expected. So, over years and years, I expected one of them to win out, and eventually it never did. So now in a professional environment, sometimes when I start a character, it's based on my inspiration level or where my head is at. I'll paint on top of a photograph, sometimes I'll start with a gesture drawing, sometimes I'll start with black and white line art, sometimes I'll start with a value study, sometimes I'll start with a color palette and paint right from there. It really depends on what mood I'm in and what method best suits the sort of thought process that I'm already in. Because I've built up and banked up all those different recipes over the years, now when somebody says, hey, can you start this piece with a sketch? Yes, I can. Hey, can you start this piece if I give you a 3D model and you paint on top of it? Yes, I can. Which is akin to asking a chef, hey, can you make soup? Yes, I can. Can you bake me some bread? Yes, I can. The more of these methodologies you have, the more versatile and therefore the more valuable you are as an artist. So hopefully this sort of satisfied that itch of asking that question of what is the best way to start a piece. Because sure, in the short term, you can say, always start with a value study, or always start with a black and white sketch, or something similar. I always start with a photograph. But I think that when you do that, you're limiting all the options you have available for trying out different pipelines and finding out which one, not which one works best for you, but which one works best under certain conditions and certain moods that you're in. I truly think that as someone who tried forever, sort of became a jack of all trades, felt like I was never mastering the one painting methodology that was going to make everything click for me, I look back at my career and realize, oh, I was mastering all of them. Now I have that priceless set of options, which if one isn't working, I switch to another. And that, I think, puts me in a really good position to jump between multiple different pipelines and still find success most of the time. And that's all we're really trying to do, is find most success most of the time with most assignments. And I think that's how you become a strong concept artist, is you can solve most problems most of the time under most conditions. If you'd like to see the rest of this character creation lesson that was playing in the background, I've made the whole lesson available for free by following the link in the description. Head on over to controlledcrashart.com and grab your copy now. I can't wait to see what you do with it. And if you're ready to go way beyond what I have on my channel and truly jumpstart your concept career, check out Crash Course for Concept Artists. I've distilled down all of my knowledge built up over a decade and a half in the entertainment industry down into one powerful course that's designed to take you from the early stages of getting to know Photoshop through to creating inspiring pieces of concept art of your own at a professional level. I cover everything from rendering, color mixing, shape language, environment design, character design, composition, and photo bashing, to finishing touches and how to fix and improve your pieces and take them to that next level. I condense down all the lessons that I learned so you don't have to, and I show you the inside tricks and shortcuts that'll help you realize how good you already are. Because that's my passion and my mantra. You're better than you think you are. So if you're ready to see that and join me on that next level, check out Crash Course for Concept Artists and let's see how far you can go. Head on over to controlledcrashart.com/courses to join now. I'll see you there. As a special thank you to viewers, you can enter the promo code in the description to get 20% off this month. So, once again, thank you so much for watching. I wish you the absolute best of painting. And until next time, go make worlds.